When a woman crosses 60, there is a silence that begins to surround her. It is not simply the silence of fewer voices in her home, nor the silence of children who have long since grown and gone. It is a deeper silence, the silence of the soul, a recognition that the years behind her are far greater than the years ahead. In that silence, she begins to ask herself a question that pierces the core of her being. What is worth carrying with me into the final chapters of my life? And what must I lay down? Many older women walk away from relationships not because they are bitter or incapable of love, but because they discover that peace is more valuable than companionship that costs them their dignity or their sanity. They have lived through decades of compromise, of bending themselves to fit the expectations of others. And when they finally reach this stage of life, they realize that sacrificing their inner peace is no longer a price they are willing to pay. Peace becomes the rarest jewel, more precious than fleeting romance, more healing than any promise of intimacy. Another reason lies in the weight of memory. Older women have accumulated decades of scars, betrayals, disappointments, and heartbreaks that younger people cannot yet imagine. These experiences teach them to see patterns. They know what happens when they ignore the early signs of disrespect, when they pretend love will heal incompatibility, when they convince themselves they can fix what is broken in another. With age comes the ruthless clarity that time is too short to repeat the same mistakes. So they walk away not out of fear, but out of wisdom earned in blood and regret. There is also the deep hunger for authenticity. After 60, women no longer want masks, roles, or games. They have no desire to impress, to perform, or to fit into someone else's narrative. They want conversations that matter, relationships built on truth, not fantasy. If they do not find this, they would rather remain alone than participate in the exhausting theater of pretending. Loneliness, though heavy, is more bearable than living a lie. For many, health and mortality play their part. A woman at 60 knows she cannot squander her remaining energy on chaos. Every ounce of vitality matters. A toxic relationship drains her very life, accelerates her decline, while solitude allows her to preserve her strength, to walk in nature, to breathe freely, to prepare for the years that remain. What was once tolerable in youth becomes intolerable in old age because the margin of waste has vanished. Finally, there is the quiet call of purpose. Older women often rediscover passions left behind, creating, teaching, mentoring, building, or simply reflecting. These pursuits give them meaning far deeper than a strange relationship ever could. They realize that companionship without shared purpose is hollow. But solitude aligned with truth can be profoundly rich. To choose solitude is not always to choose despair. Sometimes it is to choose a higher path, a path where the soul finds alignment with what is eternal. So when you see an older woman walking away from relationships after 60, do not mistake her for broken. Understand instead that she has reached a place of radical honesty with herself. She no longer needs to prove, to chase, to conform. She seeks something rarer, something sacred, peace of mind, truth of heart, and the strength to walk alone if necessary. And that is not weakness. That is the highest form of courage. It is the courage to face life and death with uncompromising honesty. There comes a time in a woman's life when the noise of the world grows quiet, when the endless striving and proving, the constant wrestling with others for attention, approval, or affection finally loses its power. For many older women, this happens after 60. They discover that what they once thought they could not live without, companionship, romance, validation, is not as essential as they believed. What rises to the top instead is the profound value of peace. Peace is no longer a luxury. It is survival. It becomes the one thing they cannot negotiate away, not for anyone, not for any reason. You see, when a woman is younger, she often tolerates conflict in the name of love. She accepts drama because she tells herself that passion and turbulence are inseparable. She sacrifices her calm for the sake of keeping a relationship alive, even when it eats away at her spirit. But by the time she reaches 60, she has lived long enough to see the damage that chaos inflicts. Sleepless nights, stress that erodes health, the gnawing anxiety of not knowing when the next argument will erupt. It begins to dawn on her that the real enemy of her well-being is not solitude, but conflict. And once this truth settles in, she no longer sees companionship as worth the cost if it comes tied to turmoil. Older women understand that peace is the foundation upon which everything else rests. Without peace, there can be no joy. Without peace, even love turns toxic. Without peace, health deteriorates, the mind fractures, and the soul grows weary. That awareness is sharpened by the realization that time is limited. A younger woman can waste 10 years in a turbulent relationship and still believe she has time to recover. An older woman cannot. Every year counts. Every day matters. And she knows deep inside that surrendering her final chapters to someone who cannot honor her need for calm would be a betrayal of herself. This pursuit of peace does not make her cold or unfeeling. Quite the opposite, it makes her deeply aware of what is sacred. She begins to cherish the silence of a quiet morning, the stillness of a walk at sunset, the simplicity of a day without conflict. These moments are not empty. They are rich, full of meaning because they allow her to breathe freely, to reflect honestly, to simply exist without being drained. That peace becomes a kind of sanctuary, a private temple where she can gather her thoughts, nurse her wounds, and prepare for the life she has left to live. And so she walks away, not because she has given up on love, but because she has finally understood what love must serve. If it does not serve peace, it is not love, it is bondage. If it does not honor her dignity, it is not love, it is control. She chooses solitude not because she despises others, but because she refuses to sacrifice the serenity that she has fought so long to find. For the first time in her life, she places peace above all else, and in that choice, she discovers the quiet strength to walk her own path without apology. The older a woman becomes, the more her history shapes the way she views relationships. By 60, most women have lived through their share of heartbreak, betrayal, or disillusionment. And those experiences leave deep marks. These are not abstract lessons. They are scars etched into memory, reminders of what happens when trust is misplaced or when love unravels. Younger women may still believe that every failure can be redeemed by trying again. But older women know the weight of consequences. They understand how long it takes to rebuild after a collapse, how much energy is consumed in recovering from loss, and how fragile stability can become once it is shattered. Divorce, for example, is not just an event, but a long shadow. It carries financial strain, emotional upheaval, and the dismantling of a life that took decades to build. Even those who have not faced divorce directly often carry the residue of broken trust from relationships that promised more than they delivered. These memories do not simply fade with time. They harden into caution. An older woman learns to see the early signs of trouble more quickly. What once could be ignored or excused is now recognized as a warning. This caution does not mean bitterness, though it may look like it from the outside. It is more than anything a defense of hard-earned wisdom. When a woman has spent years repairing the damage of a broken bond, she becomes less willing to risk that kind of collapse again. The scars of the past whisper to her, reminding her of the cost of entanglement, and so she becomes selective, even guarded. Better to be alone than to repeat the cycle of pain that once consumed her. By the time a woman reaches her 60s, the question of identity takes on a different weight. For decades, she may have been defined by roles: wife, mother, caregiver, nurturer, roles that demanded sacrifice, compromise, and endurance. Her sense of self was often shaped by what others needed her to be. And while those responsibilities carried meaning, they also took pieces of her that she never fully noticed until much later. When the pressure of those roles begins to ease, she is confronted with a realization that can feel both liberating and unsettling. Her life finally belongs to her. This recognition ignites a desire for authenticity. Older women begin to resist the idea of bending themselves into shapes that no longer fit. They do not want to play games of pretense, nor do they have patience for expectations that require them to hide who they truly are. The urge to reclaim their voice, their choices, and their freedom grows stronger than the pull to maintain appearances or keep others satisfied. They are less concerned with how they are perceived and more concerned with whether they are honest with themselves. It is not unusual, then, for older women to step back from relationships that threaten this hard-won authenticity. The compromises that felt tolerable in youth now feel suffocating. The desire to belong to someone else's story weakens while the need to author their own story intensifies. Freedom no longer feels selfish. It feels necessary. Solitude offers the space to rediscover passions, to live without apology, to be true to the woman they have always been beneath the layers of duty. In this way, reclaiming identity becomes less about withdrawal and more about choosing a life aligned with inner truth. There comes a point in a woman's later years when she starts to measure time differently. What once seemed endless now feels finite, and that shift changes everything. Instead of asking, "What can I gain?" the question becomes, "What is worth my remaining time?" This reevaluation is not about bitterness, but about clarity. Older women realize that they cannot afford to invest in drama, conflict, or relationships that drain their spirit. The cost of unnecessary tension is simply too high. When peace of mind becomes the most valuable currency, the desire for serenity grows stronger than the desire for companionship at any cost. They are less interested in proving themselves, less interested in chasing validation, and more invested in protecting the Kwang. At spaces of their lives. A cup of tea in silence, a walk in the early morning, a book read without interruption. These simple moments carry more weight than arguments, obligations, or misunderstandings that often come with forced relationships. This pursuit of peace is not avoidance but wisdom. Women who have seen decades of life understand how fragile health, time, and energy can be. They recognize that every commitment demands a portion of their limited reserves. Rather than scattering themselves across conflicts and expectations, they choose to conserve that energy for what nourishes them. Peace becomes a form of strength, not weakness. It allows them to live with dignity, to face each day without the burden of unnecessary chaos. There is also the reality that many older women have faced deep wounds that never fully healed. Divorce, betrayal, neglect, or even years of unspoken disappointment leave scars that cannot be erased by entering into a new relationship. With age comes the awareness that these scars shape how they see intimacy and trust. For many, it feels safer to live with their pain in solitude rather than risk reopening it. The vulnerability required to let someone in again feels like too heavy a price, especially when the chance of misunderstanding or rejection remains ever present. They carry silent burdens that others rarely see. Nights spent reflecting on what went wrong, the loneliness after children leave, the quiet regret of words never spoken. All of it adds to a reservoir of caution. Relationships are no longer just about companionship. They become arenas where old wounds can be touched again, often unintentionally. And for women who have lived long enough to know the cost of emotional turmoil, it is often easier to retreat than to gamble with the remnants of their peace. This doesn't mean they have lost the capacity to love or to give. In fact, their love runs deeper, shaped by experience and sacrifice. But they guard it with intensity, knowing that misplaced trust can unravel years of hard-won stability. They would rather protect their inner balance than compromise it for the possibility of fleeting connection. It is not coldness, but self-preservation, a recognition that carrying unhealed wounds into a relationship often leads to more pain, not less. Beyond the wounds and the weariness, there is another layer to why older women walk away from relationships after 60. It is the recognition that they have entered a different season of life, one that calls for a different kind of engagement with the world. This is not the season of building or proving worth. It is the season of reflection, of integration, of coming to terms with who they have been and who they still are. In this season, the need for external validation diminishes, and the need for internal coherence intensifies. Older women begin to ask themselves questions that they never had time to consider in their younger years. What have I learned? What do I still believe? What do I want to leave behind when I am gone? These are not questions that can be answered in the midst of drama or conflict. They require stillness, they require space, they require the kind of solitude that allows a woman to sit with herself, to face her own mind, to wrestle with the truths she has been avoiding. And so she steps back from relationships that demand constant attention, constant energy, constant engagement, because those relationships leave no room for the deeper work that her soul is calling her toward. This is not selfishness, it is necessity. The inner work that must be done in the later years of life cannot be done in the presence of chaos. It requires silence. It requires solitude. It requires the courage to face oneself without distraction. And many older women have come to understand that relationships, particularly those that are not aligned with their values, often serve as distractions from this deeper work. They fill the space with noise, with conflict, with endless negotiation, and in doing so, they prevent the woman from turning inward, from confronting the questions that matter most. And so she walks away, not because she does not value connection, but because she values something even more. She values the opportunity to complete her journey with integrity, to face the end of her life with clarity, to know that she did not waste her final years avoiding the truth. This is the work of a lifetime, and it cannot be done in the presence of someone who does not understand it, who does not respect it, who demands that she remain focused on the surface rather than descending into the depths. There is also the matter of energy, not just physical energy, but emotional and spiritual energy. Older women become acutely aware of how much energy different activities and relationships demand. They begin to see clearly which relationships give them energy and which relationships drain them. And they become ruthless in their willingness to eliminate the latter. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. They no longer have the reserves to pour into relationships that take more than they give. They cannot afford to spend their days managing someone else's emotions, navigating someone else's needs, or trying to fix what is broken in another person. This awareness leads many older women to the conclusion that it is better to be alone than to be in a relationship that leaves them depleted. Because what is the point of companionship if it costs you your vitality? What is the point of partnership if it drains the very life force you need to navigate your remaining years? These are not rhetorical questions. They are real calculations that older women make, often in the quiet hours of the morning when they reflect on how they feel, on how much energy they have left, on whether they can afford to give any more of themselves away. And more often than not, the answer is no, they cannot afford it. They have given enough, they have sacrificed enough, and now, in their final chapter, they choose to conserve what remains, to protect their energy, to use it for things that truly matter, things that bring them peace, that give them joy, that align with their deepest values. This is not withdrawal from life, it is engagement with life on their own terms. Another dimension to this phenomenon is the shift in how older women view companionship itself. In their younger years, companionship was often about shared responsibilities, shared goals, shared burdens. It was about building something together, about moving through life as a team. But after 60, many women no longer need or want that kind of partnership. They have already built what they needed to build. They have already achieved what they set out to achieve. And now they want something different. They want companionship that is rooted in depth, in understanding, in the ability to sit in silence together without needing to fill the space with words. But this kind of companionship is rare. It requires a level of emotional maturity, of self-awareness, of comfort with silence that most people simply do not possess. And so older women find themselves in a position where the kind of companionship they crave is almost impossible to find. They are no longer interested in surface level connection. They are no longer interested in relationships built on convenience or habit. They want something real, something meaningful, something that resonates with the depth of their own experience. And if they cannot find that, they would rather be alone, because being alone is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness is the feeling of disconnection, the sense that something is missing. But being alone, chosen solitude, can be deeply fulfilling. It can be a space of freedom, of creativity, of reflection, of connection with oneself. And many older women discover that being alone is far preferable to being in a relationship that feels empty, that lacks depth, that fails to meet them where they truly are. They would rather walk through life in their own company than compromise their inner world for the sake of avoiding solitude. There is also the recognition that relationships, particularly romantic relationships, often come with expectations that older women no longer want to meet. The expectation to be a certain kind of partner, to fulfill certain roles, to behave in certain ways. In their younger years, they may have accepted these expectations without question, but now they see them for what they are: constructs, stories, roles that have been assigned rather than chosen, and they no longer want to play those roles. When you see an older woman walking away from relationships after 60, understand that she is not giving up. She is choosing. She is choosing peace over chaos, truth over pretense, solitude over compromise. She is choosing to honor the life she has lived by protecting the peace she has earned. She is choosing to walk the final stretch of her journey with integrity, with clarity, with the courage to face herself and the world as she truly is. And that is not a failure. That is the ultimate success. It is the success of a life lived honestly, of a soul aligned with its own truth, of a woman who has learned finally to put herself first, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. This is the path of the awakened woman, the woman who understands that the greatest relationship she can cultivate is the one she has with herself. And in that understanding, she finds not loneliness, but liberation.